came to class today, you should be done with the first 4 chapters of the Cloven Viscount. I hope that you've read them and watched the videos that I put out with them. It's a really kind of an interesting story. Today we're going to read chapter 5, and I'm going to warn you ahead of time, chapter 5 is a little bit long. It's longer than chapters 3 and 4 put together. But we're going to read chapter 5 today, and then on our next class after today, we're going to take a quiz, and the quiz will be mostly over chapter 5. Chapter 5 is especially important because we learn a lot about the narrator, and the main themes of the story are also going to be set up here. We're also going to get a few new characters, and some of them I think are quirky and interesting. The first one you're going to meet is a guy named Dr. Trelawney. Dr. Trelawney is a ship's doctor who has been shipwrecked and stranded in Taralbla, and it seems to me like he never cared enough to go home. He's a drunk. He drinks a strong wine called Cancarone, which is probably a lot like Pisco. So he drinks this heavy brandy wine, and it says that he spends his time doing scientific research, which keeps him on the go. And so, as a young boy, the narrator spends his time wandering through the fields in the day and in the night with Dr. Trelawney, doing these sort of scientific experiments. Except they're not really all that important to science. He studies some disease that crickets have. And then he starts focusing his attention on will-o'-the-wisp, which are those little gas phenomenon that appear in cemeteries sometimes. His idea is to spend his time in these sort of trivial pursuits that aren't really important, especially when you consider that he's a physician and he could be helping people and healing people with his knowledge and with his time. But instead he spends most of his time pretty frivolously. The narrator, as a child, he doesn't have any parents. So Dr. Trelawney is sort of the closest thing he has to a father figure, and the nurse, Sebastiana, is kind of the closest thing he has to a mother figure. In literature, this kind of childhood is perfect. It's ideal, because you're absolutely free. And that's how he describes himself. So, even though the narrator is related to the Viscount, and he's the grandson of the Viscount's father, he really has a role in the house, something like a servant. He's just kind of around. Nobody ever even bothers to educate him or bring him up. So it's interesting that he's the one telling us the story. But this has appeared in other kinds of literature too. Like Huckleberry Finn, you have this child, and so what we do is we watch this story, or we appreciate this story from this child's point of view. And so it's often a story that's full of irony, because then we understand things better than the child who's telling the story. The child, the narrator, has adventures with Dr. Trelawney. One that he recounts is when they're running away from villagers, because the villagers know that they're in the graveyard and they think they're up to something that's no good. And in one adventure, they're going to hide under a bridge, but they notice something while they're hiding under the bridge. They notice that somebody has come along and split the logs that support the bridge. In other words, some evil person, and we know that it's the Viscount, has tried to set up that bridge so it would collapse and kill everybody on it. We also get the image of the Viscount as he travels around on horseback, and you can hear the horse's hooves pounding, and you have this image of the Viscount in his black cloak. He is riding around like symbolic death, and he is spreading death everywhere that he goes. So there's a good reason for the narrator to be afraid of him. He's dangerous. He's deadly. and he's evil. One of the minor characters we make is the architect, and his name is Pietro, which is Latin for Peter, and Chiodo, which is Latin or Italian for nails. So Peter Nails is the architect, and one of the things that he does is he builds these extensive killing machines for the Viscount. And he tries not to think about the fact that the inventions that he's creating cause death. For me, this is a kind of a symbol. This book was written right after World War II. And if you'll remember, World War II ended because of some of the greatest inventions ever made. Atomic bombs had been invented. But the people who invented the atomic bombs really didn't think very much about the fact that their inventions were going to cause massive death. This symbol makes this play a little bit of an allegory, at least when it comes to that part. The idea that what he does all day, what this Pietro Chiodo does all day, is think up ways for the Cloven Viscount to commit more murders, create more death. Because he's just an inventor. And so he doesn't like to think about what the Viscount is going to do with his inventions. The truth about the doctor is that he's not really a very good doctor. I mean, he doesn't care about other people. There are people in this story that need his help. Some of the characters in this story are lepers. Now, lepers, I mostly remember reading about lepers from the Bible. Leprosy is a kind of skin disease. It's a bacterial skin disease. And if it goes untreated, well, it can cause your limbs to fall off and your lips and your fingers to fall off. It's a horrific disease. And so in biblical times, people who had this horrible disease had to leave their communities and go live in communities of just lepers. There is a cure for leprosy nowadays, although a few million people still have it. But the medicine for it is free, and you can be cured if you were ever to get it. Sadly, in the time of this story, leprosy was kind of a death sentence. You were going to get it, you were going to suffer a long time, maybe years and years, and then you were going to die horribly because of it. Anyway, Dr. Trelawney has nothing to do with the lepers. He doesn't do anything to help them or anybody else in the community. He mostly just takes care of himself and his own little trivial pursuits. One day, the Viscount comes across Dr. Trelawney, and the Viscount says that he's going to help Dr. Trelawney. It's not the kind of help that you want, though. What ends up happening is the Viscount condemns a dozen peasants to death. Well, that means 12 new people are going to be buried in the cemetery, and if you have those new bodies that are there and rotting, then more will-o'-the-wisp will show up. What a horrific way. I mean, Dr. Trelawney doesn't really want this help, but he doesn't really do anything to stop the Viscount either. The Viscount is just committing murder, and he's doing it for no good reason. One new character that we meet is a leper. His name is Galateo, and he lives in the leper colony. But occasionally he comes to town and he blows a horn, and the horn that he blows makes everybody run away and hide. But they do sometimes leave some charity for him. They'll leave him some food or something else that he can take back to the leper colony with him. The name of the leper colony is Prato Fungo. In Latin, or in Italian, that means the field of mushrooms. And I wondered if in Spanish it sort of sounded like that also. But anyway, the leper colony is called Prato Fungo, and Galateo is from there, and we'll go back to there. Now, I think that it is symbolic. But I want you to know that the leper colony is kind of a symbolic place. It sounds like it is a beautiful place, and it's full of perpetual music. Everybody there is playing stringed instruments, including harps all the time. and they spend their time, it says this, they play strange instruments of their own invention, such as harps with little bells attached to the strings, and singing in falsetto, and painting eggs with daubs of every color, as if for perpetual Easter. It actually sounds a little bit like the leper colony is heaven. So you have a subtle little religious allusion here. The other thing everybody should know about lepers is Jesus was very famous for healing lepers in a time when nobody else could. So the Viscount takes up arson, and he goes around and he starts burning people's property, and then later he starts burning people's homes. He likes to burn the homes of people who are poor, and he even goes into the leper colony and hurts the people there. Not only that, but he also burns down his own castle, and he severely burns and injures the nurse, Sebastiana. Now remember, Sebastiana was somebody who raised the Viscount when he was a little boy, before he went off to war and got cut in two. And when he comes to her later, after she's bedridden and in bed because of her injuries, he notices that the nurse has burns on her face and her body. But he's evil now, and he decides that even though she's an old woman, she should get married. And she criticizes him for teasing her, but he's actually serious. And what he's going to do is he's going to tell everybody that she has leprosy, and he's going to ban her to the leper colony so that she can become the wife of Galateo. The characters in this book, and most of the characters at the time that this story takes place, especially in Italy, most of the characters are Catholic. But there are a few characters in this book called the Huguenots. It's a funny word, and sometimes Huguenots are called Calvinists, but you don't need to know that. You just need to know that the Huguenots are Protestants, not Catholics. But the story takes place in a time when Catholics would often torture and burn and be very cruel to Protestants. And the Huguenots that are in this story are immigrants. They're from another place, and they fear for their lives. And they had sacrificed so much to get to where they Terabla that they don't even have their own books or their doctrine or their religion. So they know that they're Huguenots, but they don't really even have a good sense of their own identity. They just know that they're the outsiders. They are the kind of people who don't do anything frivolous or fun or happy. They pray, they work, they live very moral lives, but they don't have very much joy in their life. These people are led by a man named Colonel Gerbido. And Colonel Gerbido, he seems like a funny fellow because he doesn't know what to say or do some of the time. And when he curses, he always says the same thing. He says, famine and plague. He repeats it over and over again. The oldest of the Huguenots is a man named Ezekiel. He has a long white beard. But we're more interested in the youngest of them. He's a guy named Esau. And Esau is Ezekiel's youngest son. And Esau has a secret hiding place, and he has some secrets that he shares them with the narrator. You see, Esau and the narrator are about the same age, but Esau has decided that he's evil, and so he does things that only evil people would do. And even though Esau sees himself as evil, I just think of him as mischievous. He smokes, he steals, he lies all the time. But quite frankly, he's a 9-10-year-old boy. A lot of them behave this way. He likes to play with dice. All these things that the Huguenots would have thought were really terrible, terrible evils were really just children acting silly and playing games. Well, in the second half of chapter 5, the Cloven Viscount comes and visits the Huguenots. And he offers them, and they're afraid of him, and he's an outsider, and they're all very nervous. And they even think about the possibility of killing him while he's in their house. But you have to understand something. One of the oldest themes in literature is when somebody comes to your house, you have to open your door and be kind and good to them, no matter who they are. You see this in very old stories like the Iliad and the Odyssey, and next year you're going to see it in the story Macbeth, when the king comes to visit Macbeth. But this idea of how you treat guests says more about you than it says about the guest. And so you must always treat guests as kindly, like you would want to be treated if you were a guest. That's a good rule. And the Huguenots, they open their door to Merdardo, even though they know he's a killer, even though they know they're afraid of him. And the main Huguenot, Colonel Garibido, and Ezekiel, what they decide is that they're not only going to let him into their house, they're also going to protect him and make sure that he stays alive and stays safe while he's in their house. They have no reason to do that except their own morality. The main reason that the Viscount is there is because he fears for his own life even in his own house. Everybody wants to kill him, but they've decided that they are going to protect him. He offers them something. He says, why don't you come to my castle and live with me, and I'll convert the whole country so that everybody's a Protestant, and I'll give you power and strength. But that would be sort of a deal with the devil. And even though you don't want to say no to somebody like the Viscount, the Huguenots are brave enough that that's just what they're going to do. When chapter 5 ends, the narrator is alone with the Viscount. The narrator is outside collecting crabs. He's just by the waterside. And the Viscount is there, and he's catching baby octopuses, and he's cutting them in half. Because when you cut them in half, they don't die right away, I guess. But he gives a funny talk where he talks about how if everybody were cut in half, they would all be wiser and better off, and they would see and have a better understanding. I think the first time I read this, I didn't really understand what he was talking about. But think of it like this. If we really think about ourselves and what inside us is good and what inside of us is evil, and we can really learn to distinguish those things, then maybe he's right. Maybe we would be a little bit more self-aware. It's something to think about. Now remember, you're going to read chapter 5 on your own, and hopefully what I've taught you today will help you a little bit. And then the next time we have class, we're going to have sort of a quiz writing assignment over it. Okay? I'll see you next class.